I remember the first time I saw her. Her long, light brown hair, the strands gently flowing like waves on the smooth skin of Serafina. Her eyes, those deep blue eyes, always shining like the endless ocean, so clear, so innocent. It felt like the whole world was nothing more than the light that radiated from her gaze. She was everything I needed, everything I ever dreamed of. We grew up together, like two halves of a perfect whole. We played under the shade of the old trees in the park, shared stories, and dreamed of a future where we'd walk hand in hand through life. When I was younger, I didn't fully understand the depth of what I felt for her, but as we grew older, I realized that the love I had for Serafina was more than just friendship. She was the only person who made my heart race faster when we laughed together, the only one who made me feel like I could fight the world to protect her. The day I knew I loved her was a hot summer afternoon. We were sitting on the porch of my old house, where we spent many quiet afternoons talking about everything and nothing. Serafina sighed, her eyes distant, as if she were searching for something in the empty space of the afternoon. "Ezra," she said softly, "have you ever thought about the future?" I paused for a moment, not because I didn't want to answer, but because I didn't need to say anything. My future had already been painted in my mind, and there was only one image, her and me. We would walk through life together, hand in hand. Everything would be just like that, forever. "Yes," I replied, my gaze locked on hers. "I think we'll have a future together. Just the two of us, Serafina." She smiled, a gentle, warm smile that melted everything around us. For that brief moment, time seemed to stop, and all that existed was us, and the beautiful love we were sharing. From that moment, I knew nothing could stand in the way of us. We grew up together, and I loved her more with each passing day. Every step I took, every decision I made, was with Serafina in my mind. She was my motivation, my reason for waking up each morning. Every morning, I would wait for her at the foot of the porch, holding the book we were reading together. Even when we argued, even when life wore us down, we always had each other. We always had those handshakes, those embraces that made sure we'd never feel alone. I still remember the night we sat together under the stars. She leaned close to me, her voice barely a whisper. "You're the brightest star in my life, Ezra." Her words, simple yet eternal, stayed with me forever. We planned our future. After graduation, we'd travel the world together, explore new lands, and then come home to build a small family. We would live in a house by the sea, where the sunlight would always shine through the windows each morning. I would wake up early, make breakfast for her, and then we'd take walks by the shore. Every day would be a new chapter in our love story, one without an ending. But that was before she began to feel tired. At first, it was just the occasional ache, then dizziness that would hit her unexpectedly. I remember that time so clearly. Serafina tried to hide it, still smiling and telling me that she just needed a little rest. But I knew something was wrong. I began to notice the change in her eyes, the weariness that she couldn't hide. And I, the one who always saw her with eyes full of love, couldn't ignore the difference. One afternoon, we were sitting in the living room when she suddenly shivered. Her eyes glazed over, as if she could no longer recognize the world around her. Panic surged through me, and I immediately called the doctor, but they only said it was a symptom of an undiagnosed illness. They couldn't do much, other than give her painkillers and say things would be okay. But I knew things weren't okay. I started to worry more than I ever had before. There was nothing I could do except stay by her side every day. I held her hand, not wanting to leave her for a second. Each time she slept, I sat beside her, watching over her, filled with all the love I had for her, praying that she would wake up and be the same again. But perhaps I was wrong. She didn't get better. And I started to realize that something much worse was happening to the girl I loved. Days bled into weeks, and as time passed, I found myself in a constant state of limbo, living, yet not fully alive. Every morning, I would wake up beside Serafina, her fragile form barely moving, and I would pray for a miracle that never came. Her once bright eyes were now clouded with confusion, and the spark that had always been there seemed to flicker and fade. She was still Serafina, but she wasn't. Not the Serafina I had known, not the one who could laugh at my silly jokes or hold me close when the world felt too heavy. Now, she only lay there, in her bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Sometimes, she would murmur something, but it was so faint, so incoherent, I couldn't even tell if she was still aware of my presence. The silence grew louder every day. Her once gentle voice, the one that had always comforted me, was now a distant memory. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, things I wanted to say but couldn't, things I wanted her to say but she couldn't. Alden came by to visit occasionally. He would sit with me for hours, trying to offer comfort, but the emptiness in his eyes told me that he, too, didn't know how to help. He would speak in soft tones, trying to draw me out of the despair that I was sinking into, but the truth was, there was nothing anyone could say. There was no way to make this better. Ezra, you have to think about your life, Alden said one evening, after watching me sit beside Serafina for hours without speaking a word. His voice was gentle but firm. I know you love her, but you can't keep living like this. You need to take care of yourself, too. You can't stay in this nothingness forever. I hated the words as they left his mouth. I hated that he was right. But how could I leave her? How could I abandon the person who had been my world, my everything, just because things were hard? My mind would scream at me, telling me that I couldn't go on like this, that I needed to let go, but my heart refused to listen. Every time I thought about stepping away, the image of her face, so pale and still, would stop me in my tracks. How could I give up on her when she needed me the most? Days blurred together, and soon, it became clear that Serafina wasn't just physically absent, she was mentally drifting further away from me. She didn't recognize me anymore, at least not in the way she used to. Her gaze would wander past me as if I was just another part of the room, a shadow that wasn't truly there. And when I called her name, there was no reaction. Nothing. Sometimes, I would beg her to come back, to just give me one more sign that she remembered me, that she still cared. But she would only close her eyes, as if my words had no weight, as if they were nothing but the wind brushing against her skin. It was in those moments that I realized something that made my heart ache with an intensity that took my breath away. I was losing her. It wasn't just the disease that was taking her away from me, it was something deeper, something more painful. She wasn't the same person anymore. She was slipping through my fingers like sand, and I couldn't stop it. I tried everything I could think of, small gestures to remind her of who we were, of the love we shared. I played the songs we used to listen to together, the ones that had always made her smile. I read her the letters we'd written each other during the summer when we were apart, remembering the promises we'd made. I even sat beside her and traced the patterns of her hand with mine, hoping she would feel the warmth of my touch and remember. But there was nothing. The silence grew louder. The more I tried to reach her, the more it seemed like she was pulling away. And in that silence, the loneliness crept in, filling every corner of my mind. There was no escaping it. There was no way to fight it. Alden noticed the change in me. He would try to get me to talk, to share what I was feeling, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain the emptiness that had become my constant companion. I was there, physically present, but a part of me was already gone. I had been waiting for her to come back, but she hadn't. And now, the longer I waited, the more I realized that I was waiting for something that may never come. The hardest part was knowing that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't save her. This disease, it was bigger than both of us. It was a silent killer, creeping through her body and stealing her away piece by piece. And I was powerless to stop it. I had once thought that love was enough to overcome anything. But now, as I sat beside her, watching her slip further and further away from me, I realized that sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, love can't stop the inevitable. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. It was a rainy evening when the weight of everything truly hit me. The days had blurred into one endless loop of hospital visits, quiet conversations with doctors who always spoke in terms I could hardly understand, and the hollow silence of an empty room when Serafina wasn't awake to fill it. I would come home after each visit, my hands trembling, and simply sit in the living room, her absence growing heavier with every passing hour. I still couldn't shake the image of her, the way she looked before all of this. Her laughter, light as a breeze, her voice filled with dreams and promises. She was so full of life then. So alive. But now, she was like a ghost of herself, an echo of the person I had once known. The memory of her smile, the way her eyes sparkled with excitement when she talked about our future, it all felt so far away. It was almost like I was holding on to a memory of a memory. Faint, fading, slipping through my grasp. I couldn't bring myself to let go of that memory, though. I wouldn't. I refused to. One evening, as I sat by her bedside, my fingers tracing the outline of her hand, I found myself lost in the past again. We had spent hours talking about our dreams, our plans, our one day, that felt so real back then. I could almost hear her voice, her words, in my mind, one day, Ezra, we'll have everything we've ever wanted. A house by the sea, a small family, and a lifetime to spend with each other. I promise you, we'll always have that. But now, it felt like a cruel joke. Those dreams were nothing but distant shadows, fading into the dark. I had always thought of our future in terms of time, endless time. But now, every moment with her felt like it could be the last. And each second I spent with her, I couldn't help but think about all the things I hadn't said, all the things I hadn't done. I needed to do something, anything, to make sure she knew how much I loved her, how much I still needed her. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the soft rustle of the rain against the window. I leaned closer to her, the smell of antiseptic mixing with the faint scent of lavender she used to wear. Her breath was shallow, her chest rising and falling with slow, uneven rhythm. Serafina, I whispered, my voice barely a tremor in the quiet room. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? But she didn't respond. She never did. My heart clenched, the tightness in my chest almost unbearable. I closed my eyes, letting the flood of memories wash over me. I thought of the days when we were young, when we would sit on the porch, the sun setting behind us, and she would rest her head on my shoulder. I thought of the walks we took along the river, our fingers intertwined as we shared our hopes for the future. Those were the days when nothing seemed impossible. When love was enough to make us believe in anything. Now, all I had was this. Silence. A silence that seemed to grow louder with every passing day. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the gray mist. The rain had started to pour harder, but I didn't care. The cold air felt like a wake-up call, reminding me that I was still alive. But how long would that last? How long will you stay with me? I asked the rain, though I knew the answer. I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. But deep down, I knew the truth. The day would come when I would have to face it. The day would come when I would have to say goodbye. I had to prepare myself for that day, even if my heart wasn't ready. The next day came all too quickly. I woke to the sound of the doorbell, a soft, insistent ring that seemed to echo through the quiet house. I had forgotten what it felt like to be startled by anything. My life had become so still, so stagnant. But when I opened the door, I was met with Alden's concerned face, his eyes clouded with worry. Ezra, he said, his voice steady but with a trace of urgency. We need to talk. I motioned for him to come in, stepping aside. He didn't waste any time getting to the point. Serafina's condition has worsened, Alden said. The doctors say, they say there's not much more they can do. My breath caught in my throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, everything spinning around me. I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't hear it. What does that mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Alden's expression softened, but his words were still blunt. It means we don't have much time left, Ezra. You need to prepare yourself. My knees buckled, and I found myself leaning against the wall for support. My head was spinning. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to have more time. We were supposed to grow old together. But life didn't care about what was supposed to be. I turned away, my hand gripping the edge of the counter as I tried to steady myself. No, no, I can't lose her. Not now. Not like this. I know, Alden said quietly, stepping closer. But sometimes, no matter how much we fight it, we can't change what's meant to be. I didn't want to hear it. But his words rang in my ears, louder than the rain outside. The news hit me like a tidal wave, sweeping me off my feet and leaving me stranded in a sea of disbelief. For days, I couldn't find the words to express what I felt. Every conversation seemed distant, muffled by the heavy ache in my chest. Alden's words haunted me, replaying in my mind, each repetition more painful than the last. You need to prepare yourself. But how could I prepare myself for something like this? How could I prepare to lose the one person who had always been my anchor, the one who made everything, no matter how dark, feel worth it? I spent the next few days in a haze. I stayed by Serafina's side, holding her hand, feeling the coldness creeping into her skin. The room felt colder now, and every breath she took seemed like a gift, a fragile thread that I was holding onto with all my might. Her eyes, once so vibrant, were now sunken, the sparkle gone. I would talk to her, even though I knew she couldn't hear me, couldn't respond. Serafina, I whispered softly, brushing the damp strands of her hair from her face. You remember that night we danced under the stars? Don't you? I remember everything, your laughter, the way your eyes shone in the moonlight. We were so young then. So full of life. I trailed off, choking back the lump in my throat. The silence in the room was deafening. It wasn't just the silence of the room, but the silence between us, the words we never said. The promises we never got to make. The future we had imagined together, now slipping away like sand through my fingers. But that was the cruelest part. The cruelest part wasn't just her fading away, but that we were never going to get the chance to say the things we should have said. The things I should have said. I had always believed in the power of words. They were my comfort, my weapon against the world. But now, as I sat here, looking at her, looking at the woman I had loved since childhood, I realized that the words I had been saving for so long were useless. There was no time left to speak them. Serafina, I whispered again, my voice trembling. I love you. I've always loved you. You know that, don't you? I felt a chill pass through me, and for a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But then, as if by some miracle, her hand shifted in mine. A small, almost imperceptible movement. I held my breath, my heart skipping a beat. Serafina. I said again, leaning closer to her, my face just inches from hers. Can you hear me? There was no answer. No smile. No recognition in her eyes. But the faint pressure of her fingers on mine gave me a glimmer of hope. I didn't care that she couldn't respond. The fact that she had heard me, that she had felt my presence, that was enough. I sat there for what felt like hours, my hand gently wrapped around hers, waiting for something more. Anything. But nothing came. I spent every moment I could with her, clinging to the idea that somehow, even if she couldn't say anything, she knew I was there. That she knew I was still fighting for her, still hoping against all hope. The doctors had told me there was nothing more they could do. The disease had taken its course, and now we were simply waiting for the inevitable. I hated them for saying it. I hated them for giving up. But I couldn't change it. No matter how hard I tried to hold on, no matter how hard I prayed for a miracle, Serafina's body was failing her. She was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of a soft cry, a sound so fragile, so delicate, that I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. My heart raced as I stood up quickly, rushing to Serafina's side. She was awake. Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated as if she had just returned from a long, dark sleep. Her breathing was shallow, and for a moment, I feared it was too late. But then, she shifted her gaze to me. Her lips parted, as if she were trying to say something. "Serafina," I said softly, brushing the hair from her forehead. "Can you hear me?" She blinked, slowly, her hand twitching in mine. My heart leaped in my chest, a mix of hope and fear swirling inside me. And then, with all the strength she had left, she whispered one word. "Ezra." My name. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard, a lifeline thrown to me in the midst of a storm. My breath caught in my throat, and I clutched her hand tightly. "I'm here," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm here, Serafina. I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, that it was a fleeting dream. But as she looked at me with those faintly aware eyes, I knew it was real. She had heard me. She had felt me. I love you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the words were enough to shatter the walls I had built around my heart. And then, just as quickly, her eyes closed again, and the world around us seemed to freeze. I stayed by her side, my hand in hers, not letting go. Time didn't matter anymore. It didn't matter that we didn't have much time left. What mattered was that, in that one moment, we had shared something that was more powerful than anything else. A love unspoken, but understood. A love that transcended time, space, and even death. I knew the end was near. But I also knew that in her last moments, Serafina had given me the greatest gift she could, a reminder that love, even in the face of inevitable loss, would never truly fade. I stayed there with her, whispering my love to her over and over again, knowing that no matter what happened, we would always have this moment. We would always have each other. The days that followed were quieter than the ones before. The world outside continued on, busy, fast, unbothered by the turmoil that had consumed my life, but everything felt muted. Distant. As if I was living in a world that no longer existed. Serafina's breaths had become more labored, slower. The doctors had said she wouldn't make it through the week, that it was only a matter of time before her fragile body gave way to the disease. Yet, every time I looked at her, I found myself hoping against all logic, against everything I knew, that I would somehow wake up from this nightmare and find that none of this was real. But it was real. Every tear, every heartbeat, every moment I spent beside her, it was real. And now, I had to face the reality that she was leaving me. That this was how our story would end. Not in the way we had always dreamed, not with the laughter of children, not with years of growing old together, but with this. With her slipping away quietly, slowly, while I held her hand, powerless to stop it. The night came just as the doctor had predicted. I had spent the entire day by her side, watching her, talking to her even when I wasn't sure if she could hear me. She hadn't opened her eyes in hours, and each time I called her name, there was no response. I couldn't bring myself to leave her side, even for a moment. The thought of being away from her, even for a second, felt like it would tear me apart. But as the moonlight bathed the room in silver, something shifted. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, my head resting on the edge of the mattress, when I felt her fingers twitch. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, my desperate need for a sign that she wasn't truly gone, but then I felt it again, stronger this time. I sat up, my heart racing in my chest. Serafina. I whispered, my voice breaking. Serafina, are you awake? Her eyes opened slowly, faint and clouded, but there was something there, something in her gaze. It was almost like she was trying to tell me something, trying to speak without words. I leaned closer, afraid that if I blinked I would lose the moment. Ezra, she whispered, barely audible, but it was her voice. Her beautiful voice that I had been craving to hear again. I'm sorry, I shook my head, tears blurring my vision. No. No, don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize. You've never had to apologize for anything, Serafina. Her lips trembled into a weak smile, a smile that broke my heart. I love you. I love you too, I whispered fiercely, my hand squeezing hers. I always will. I promise. Her eyes fluttered shut again, and the room grew still. For a moment, I thought she had fallen back to sleep, but then I saw it, the faintest of smiles, barely there, but it was enough to break me. She was at peace. She had let go. She was ready, even if I wasn't. I knew, in that moment, what I had to do. The selfish part of me wanted to hold on, to never let go of her. But I knew she was tired. She had fought so hard, and now it was her turn to rest. She had given me everything she could, and now I had to do the same for her. As I sat there, my tears falling freely, I kissed her forehead gently. It's okay, Serafina. I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion. I'll be okay. You can go now. I'll always love you. Her hand went limp in mine. The room was silent, save for the sound of my broken heart. And just like that, the woman who had been my everything was gone. The days that followed were a blur. I had never imagined what life would be like without her, but now that she was gone, it was more unbearable than I could have ever thought possible. The house felt empty, the silence louder than ever before. I didn't know how to fill the void. I didn't know how to live without her. She had been my reason for everything, the center of my universe, and now, I was left to navigate a world without her light. I sat by the window, staring out at the sky, the memory of her voice still echoing in my ears. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt damp, the weight of my grief hanging over me like a cloud. But even in my sorrow, I knew something. I knew that I would never forget her. Serafina had left a mark on my heart that would never fade, a love that would never die. She had been my greatest adventure, my truest companion, and even though she was gone, her love still lived within me. I would carry it with me for the rest of my life. I stood up, wiping the tears from my face, and walked to the small table where we used to sit, our fingers intertwined, talking about our dreams and hopes for the future. I placed a single rose on the table, a symbol of what we had shared, of the love we had built. And then, I whispered one last time, goodbye, Serafina. I will always love you.